Kirsten Baumgart-Turner today on Sustainable Hawaii. I'm usually here on Fridays. No, it's just a change just for today. And with me today, I'm so lucky, I have Dr. Ruth Gates, who is the queen of Coconut Island. No. Actually, yes, she is. But more formerly known as the director and researcher of the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. Ruth, thank you so much for coming to Think Tech Hawaii and Sustainable Hawaii to talk about what's happening in the world of corals. It's a lot. It's exciting. Tell us about last week and what's been going.
It is an exciting time. It's an exciting time and a sad time. Last week here in Hawaii, we had 2,500 of the world's best coral researchers and practitioners come to the convention center to really talk about what they're doing in their places. This is an international group, what they're doing in their places, and how we can use what's being done to forward the agenda to protect coral reefs. Now, to be honest, this is the downside of the story here. I'm going to bring you all down and tell you.
Before you bring us down, a little bit of a clarification.
Yes.
What is a coral reef practitioner? Now, I know what researchers are, but what's a practitioner?
So a coral reef practitioner is somebody who's on the ground actually tasked with managing the resource. So the science community does science. One would hope that the science and the state-of-the-art knowledge about how corals and coral reefs function then translates to people on the ground who use that knowledge to really forward really effective management and protection of the resource.
Okay.
So the conservation professionals and the management agencies who are all really tasked with the idea of protecting reefs.
So does that include sort of the, as we call them, the Malama Aina folks?
Absolutely. The community
groups?
We had many people from the community with us last week. We had a number of community events. It is about everyone. Everybody has a responsibility to take care of these natural systems because, let's face it, these natural systems take care and support us. And I think many people, because coral reefs can't be seen from the surface, don't really understand why they're important to them. And they do many different things. Most notably, a quarter of the fish species that live in the ocean spend some time on a coral reef.
Wow.
That's a huge amount.
Wow.
And many of those things are part of our food supply. And then, you see those gorgeous waves crashing over a barrier somewhere offshore. Those white caps that you see are really crashing over the reef itself. And the reef is protecting the land directly behind it. So they have this incredibly important role in protecting and maintaining the land where we live. So they're critical to the amount of living space that we as humans have.
And they create their own ecosystem within themselves.
They do, because they're incredible shapes and sizes. And, the animals, they are animals. And many people will say, those look like rocks on the bottom. Why do we have to protect those? They're just rocks. But they're incredibly sophisticated and beautiful, beautiful animals that create these structures that combine to form reefs. And these reefs can be seen from space. Amazing.
Amazing. So at the Coral Reef Symposium last week, there were 2,500 people. And what happened?
Well, what happened was there's a lot of people to convene in one place, and we really convene about different themed sessions about different types of science that's been done. Maybe how do coral reefs adapt to the changes that are happening? And really, the overarching theme was science to policy. How can we take the science knowledge and advance policy action that will, in turn, protect reefs and enable them to serve us?
I'm sorry, I cut you off a little earlier.
Yeah.
You were going to give us the downer. So give us the downer.
The downer, the really big downer. And it is a really big downer. And even though I have a smile on my face, I could cry when I say this. That, arguably 50% of the world's reefs have already been lost as a result of climate change 50%. And direct use of the lands around them and the pollution of near coastal waters. That's huge. We had a really serious, corals are very sensitive to warmer than normal water. And as climate change intensifies, the most profound impact is the warming of the ocean. And so take an organism that's already living close to the limit for temperature, push the temperature a bit high, and we keep seeing coral reefs suffer as a result of these atypically high seawater temperatures that we're seeing. And this last 2 years, we've had this massive global bleaching event. And bleaching just means huge stress events on a reef. Coral goes white, and the white coral will often die. And
specifically here in Hawaii, we have had that, right?
actually, we had 2 bleaching events in Hawaii. One in 2014 that was a sort of a really local event associated with very calm weather and very high sunlight that warmed the water. And then in 2015, part of this 3rd global bleaching event, we had another event. Now, to let you know how unusual that is, the previous bleaching event was in a very minor event in 2010 and one in 2002. So 2 back-to-back in 2014 and 2015, it's unprecedented. And the extent of those events here in Hawaii were very widespread, particularly the 2015 event. So it's a sentinel that something is fundamentally wrong with the planetary system. And unless we get this under control, unless we get climate change under control, the temperatures will continue to increase and coral reefs will die.
And that is going to change dramatically our nearshore environments here in Hawaii.
Absolutely. It will affect our food supply. It will affect the amount of land we have to live on. The dead coral will no longer protect the land, and it will be eroded out by large storms coming through. There will no longer be a tourist economy that is supported by the coral reef, and that will all combine to basically make Hawaii much more isolated, less resourced, and people will start moving from one place to another to find food, to find places to live. It's the implications of not taking care of these natural systems are quite profound. And somebody recently talked about the number of drugs that are being developed for human conditions like cancer that are coming from places like living coral reefs. So this is a profound link to our health.
And also, as you mentioned in the economy, I read years ago, so it could be wrong, but that the white sand is actually produced in large measure by fish eating coral. Is that true?
Coral contribute to the overall balance of the sand in a place. And so, they play so many fundamental roles in maintaining people that I don't think we've made a very good argument for that. The coral reef fields know this, but I don't think we've connected these discussions very well to people, so people don't understand why they should care or be advocating the protection of the system that is somewhere just offshore here.
Well, you brought in some interesting visuals that kind of help tell the story. Shall we have a look at those?
Absolutely. So this is a visual that really talks about how exquisitely complex these organisms are. As I said, they're animals, but they actually have tiny, tiny little plants living inside their tissues.
Oh, how beautiful.
And that's what gives them their brown color. So when we talk about corals bleaching, what we're really talking about is them losing these tiny plants that live inside of themselves. It's a breakdown of that relationship. Now, that's important because those tiny cells inside of them feed them. They do what all plants do. They are the amazing creatures on the planet that can basically take sunlight, bring carbon dioxide that we breathe out together with water to make a food molecule. That's what plants do for us. They are the base of the food chain on which everything else depends.
So these tiny little plants inside the corals are photosynthesizing and feeding the corals.
Exactly.
Wow, how clever of corals to have internal food generation.
I know, because let's face it, we can't do that.
No, we
We
can't.
cannot do that. And actually, when I first started studying corals, it was this relationship that just fascinated me. It was like how, and it's not that corals have them just inside their tissues. These tiny cells live inside the coral cells themselves, right? So over the 50 million years that these animals have interacted with this particular type of cell, They have somehow managed, the plant cells, to mask themselves as being part of the coral. So the coral doesn't try to get rid of them. You know, when we get infected by a microorganism, we're constantly trying to get it out, get it away. Corals, for some reason, have decided, you know what, it's a good deal for me to have these tiny little cells inside me. I'm just going to have them. Now imagine if we could do that. There'd be no point for us to eat. We'd be able to, I mean, there would be no problem with the food supply. I mean, it's a brilliant, brilliant evolutionary
Talk about
innovation.
a sustainable system.
That's right.
Wow.
That's it. We should have green clothes. That's what we should have, right? Amazing. That's right.
Wardrobes.
That's right.
All right. So what else have we got here?
So this is the context for climate change, the changes in coral reefs. So that's really just a picture of a very healthy reef, and right next door, a white reef that is now a reef that's in the middle of a temperature disturbance that has lost all its tiny little plant cells. So those corals are still alive, but they're now starting to starve because they don't have a food supply. And at the bottom, you see a reef that's been completely killed by a bleaching event. The corals that were starved to death, and now that reef is dead. It will eventually totally break down because the animals that create the structure are no longer alive. And so things will erode it, storms will come and damage it, and suddenly you have this three-dimensional city that's laid to rubble.
And at this point, the fish are no longer interested in it?
So while the structure still retains, while the three-dimensionality is still there, the fish will still live in it, but very soon as the whole structure collapses, the fish will have nowhere to go. So it's literally like taking, you know, a high-rise area, blasting it, pushing it to the ground. You know how many places there are to live in a city that's been bombed. There's nowhere to live. I mean, it's really the analogy is a bustling city to a completely barren landscape.
And in that last slide, they were kind of dark. So
That's
does
right.
so if we see dark coral, that means that it's dead coral?
So corals naturally are dark brown. But when you look at a living coral, you can see it's just completely clean. Nothing else is growing on it. It just has brown tissue really stretched over the skeleton, which is white. And when a coral dies, it turns brown, but it's a much murkier brown. And it's fuzzy. It's like things are growing all over it. And you can see that it's just not healthy and vibrant any longer. So it's actually quite easy when you go and you look at them to distinguish a healthy versus a bleached versus a dead coral, and it's to do with the fuzz that grows on them.
Okay.
See how fuzzy that is?
So all the things that live in the coral and eat the coral, they have to go somewhere else for lunch.
They do. And, you know, where do they go? We don't really know. And, you know, I will say this, that there's also this compounding issue that a lot of the things that live on reefs that we eat, we have now taken off the reef because we've eaten them. And so humans are consuming a lot of the things that actually enable corals to be healthy, because the fish that we eat also keep the areas where corals live clean.
Can you give a couple of examples of local species before we take a break of that?
Well, the reef fish are no longer actually really on our menus, and that's because they were basically taken out of the ocean very early on. I mean, there's a huge discussion of the aquarium trade, for example.
Right.
That's not ending up on our plates, but that's being shipped out to other places. Anything that's pretty. You know, humans love pretty things, and we love to put them in tanks if we don't have direct access. I would say, let's bring the imagery to the reef and stop taking things out. So with our technology, we can visualize what's going on in a living underwater system now and bring that into people's homes rather than trying to transport the system in its entirety.
It's a really good idea. Yeah. Let's take a break right now, Dr. Gates, and then talk more about coral and the symposium and what's happening for action to help the corals.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Kaui.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen, host of Likeable Science on ThinkTech Hawaii. I hope you'll join me each Friday afternoon as we explore the amazing world of science. We bring on interesting guests, scientists from all walks of life, from all walks of science, to talk about the work they do, why they do it, and moreover, why it's interesting to you, what the science really means to your life, its impacts on you, how it's shaping the world around you, and why you should care about it. I do hope you'll join me every Friday at 2 p.m. for Likeable Science.
Aloha, I'm Kirsten Baumgart-Turner, and I'm fortunate to be able to host Sustainable Hawaii at thinktechhawaii.com. I hope you'll join in with us every Tuesday from 12 noon to 1 p.m. to see the interesting people we have to share with you their information. Aloha.
Welcome back to Sustainable Hawaii. I'm Kaui Lucas, sitting in for Kirsten Baumgart-Turner. And today, my guest is the Queen of Coconut Island, Dr. Ruth Gates. We've been talking about coral, the rather dire strait of corals, and you have a series of images here that give us some more information.
Absolutely. So, one thing, we talk about the, 50% of the world's corals have likely been damaged at this point, but one thing that's really obvious is that there's a lot of variability in the system, right? So some reefs die, but many survive. Some corals die, but some survive. And sometimes they're right next door to each other on the reef, and they're the same species. And so the question is,
why?
Why, exactly. So we know that there are several things about the biology. It's, who you are, what your genetics are is really, really important. And remember I said they associate with a lot of these tiny little plants inside their tissues, but they also have bacteria, good bacteria, healthy bacteria that live on them that help them function too. Who they partner with in terms of the plant or the microbe is critically important in how they make it through a stress event. And then lastly, we now have started to believe that what and how they've experienced stress in the past helps them.
Wow, corals have memory?
They have memory.
Wow.
So, so what we decided to do was to start focusing on these survivors. Instead of talking about the things that were dying, asking questions about, well, what can we do? If we have all this basic science that tells us that genetics, your partnerships, and your environmental history is important, why not harness that to assist corals or develop corals that could potentially survive the conditions of the future that we know are going to be warmer and more acidic? And so we responded to a call to action that came from an unusual source, Paul Allen, who's the co-founder of Microsoft. He put out a challenge to the community and said, give us your best ideas for mitigating the impacts of climate change in marine systems. And so myself and my collaborator, Madeline Van Oppen from Ames, responded to that call, and much to our surprise, won the competition with the idea of assisting corals, breeding corals for the future.
Wow, this is pretty amazing. And what did that win come with?
Well, initially it came with a $10,000 prize. And so Madeline and I split that, and we used that actually to bring us together to write the proposal that was then requested from Paul Allen's family foundation. As a person of high net worth, he asked us how we would actually do it. Now, not only just the idea, but what would you do next? And so we put in a proposal, and that proposal was fully funded last year to the tune of $4 million.
That's fabulous.
It's transformative.
Wow.
It's transformative amount of money to do this kind of work. And I think it speaks to how urgent the need to act is. And our project is a proof of concept. The question isn't how we do it, but can we do it? And we proposed a series of experiments that really talked about selectively breeding the corals. This is not genetic modification, but selectively breeding them to basically breed the strongest in the population, so that we would really enhance the capacity of the offspring to withstand the future. Or maybe we could give them experiences that would trigger these memories. We could do that in the lab. And could we raise the resistance of a coral, either it or its offspring?
So how far along are you in this process? Have you started the actual
Work?
Yeah.
Yes, we have, and so we've been very busy. It was awarded in June, the end of June last year, and so we're just coming to the end of our very first year, and we've been able to start conditioning corals, that is, giving them these experiences. So we've created outdoor tanks where we can simulate future ocean conditions. That's not trivial. That's taken quite a lot of engineering and quite a lot of plumbing. So I have a team of people who are very, very multidisciplinary working on the project. And then, we have to collaborate with the state to get permits to do the actual collections of corals and bring them into the lab to do those experiments. So we collaborate with the state, are very much in this game. The University of Hawaii, Coconut Island itself, the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, there is no better place in the world to do this kind of work, unique.
And your collaborator is in Australia. Are there ongoing experiments in Australia as well?
Yes. In fact, we're doing parallel work. So some of the same species exist in both locations, and we are asking about whether or not the same species collected in two places and treated in equivalent ways, if we see similar responses. And the really
amazing.
biggest comparison between our two locations is at Coconut Island, all of our experiments are done outdoors and fed with reef water coming straight off the reef. So, but in Australia, they're using this National Sea Simulator, which is an entire building that is dedicated, a $50 million facility, dedicating to recreating environments and controlling environment. All the water is filtered, everything is controlled. So we're comparing, here's our experiments done in very rustic conditions versus very refined, and asking the question of which is the better way to do it.
And getting to do both. That
Yeah.
sounds like scientific.
In parallel.
Scientific
Amazing.
nirvana.
Amazing. It's amazing, and all of our project our intent is to release our data as quickly as possible, because the problem is so urgent. We need to address the issues. We need to think about solutions for coral reefs because they're dying at an alarming rate. So in my opinion, this also changes the way we do and distribute our information. And so we have these missions, we're doing rapid data releases. We're sequencing 5 genomes of corals, different species, all of them here in Hawaii. And we're releasing those genomes to the entire scientific community so everybody can use the information. And when the original human genome was done, it transformed the ability of the entire community to work on human medicine.
Sure.
We'll do exactly the same with these coral genomes. So open data, team, collaboration, it's a different way of configuring how we do the project because the time is so critical.
Do you know of other institutions in other places that are trying to recreate your work or using the data?
Either recreate or complement. And some of the things we're really interested in doing is working with the people who are doing coral farming already. There's many people who are farming corals, either for the aquarium trade or to do restoration. Some of these are people who have really no science training whatsoever. And our goal is to translate our results very quickly into that community and saying, well, if you've got a number of corals on a rack, and for tidiness, you've put all the same individuals right next door to each other, mix it up, mix the individuals up, so when they do sexually reproduce, they mix rather than being next to somebody who they can't reproduce with, right? And this actually speaks to another facet of corals. You can cut them into 20 pieces, and each of those pieces is genetically identical. They can't sexually reproduce with one another. So when you mix those fragments up with multiple individuals, you're mixing different genotypes, different individuals. And that's a simple change to the way that the coral farmers might be doing business that can have huge implications for reproduction in coral. So
yeah, I'm just realizing that then if you cut it all up and they all have the same genome, then how do you know somebody somebody's different.
That's right. So it's very complex because, you know, often the ones that are farmed are the ones that are very branching and they're very different shaped. You know, corals are like shapeshifters, right? The same species can have quite different shapes. And so this is how people keep an eye on the genotype, is they basically cut them up and they grow them all in the same place, which is exactly the opposite of what you should be doing. So, you know, mix, even if you randomly mix. So, but the other thing is that there are other groups who are doing aspects of work that will actually inform our project as well. People who are working on developing sexual reproductive techniques for corals. You know, corals really only reproduce in the summer. So that means when you're working with trying to say, selectively breed, you have to have your ducks really well in a row to be able to do those experiments in these very short spaces of time in the summer.
How do you know when a coral's in heat?
Well, they're amazing creatures because we could set our watches by corals releasing their eggs and sperm into the water column. I mean, they're that accurate for timing. They set their own timing to reproduce to our moon cycle and temperature.
Wow.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. So you can go in the water at say, oh, this species is going to reproduce at 6:10, 4 days after a new moon. And off it goes.
Wow.
Incredible. And it's incredible to watch.
So, Dr. Gates, we only have a minute and a half. There's just so much in the world of corals. So, is there anything that you'd especially like people to take away from today's discussion?
Yes. You know, I think the climate change as a problem is really big and sometimes paralyzing for individuals to understand what they can do. And I keep saying to people, look, we know we need to recycle, we know we need to do, you know, we need to put solar on, we know to electric cars, you know, just do one thing. Just start with one thing. I always say this, start with one thing, change one behavior to advance the initiative of sustainability. If everybody does one thing, it'll be a massive change in behavior. And then when you get used to that one thing, move to the next thing. This is where we can train ourselves, but don't try and do everything all at once, because let's face it, we get overwhelmed. It's like when I try and diet. Man, if I do all of it once, I fail, quite obviously. So, you know, what I think the thing is just to take something that resonates with an individual, and that will ultimately protect reefs.
And that one thing could be being committed to take care of the coral right here in Hawaii.
Don't drop your anchor on a living coral reef.
I always wonder why we have that video at Hanauma Bay, but it's not on every airplane coming into Hawaii telling people how to treat our corals. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gates.
Pleasure. Really a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Aloha, and you'll be back with Kirsten Baumgart-Turner next week at this time. Aloha.